Hey guys, how's it going? Caleb here. Hope you're doing well, love ya. And I often get accused on this channel in the comments of being a partisan hack, or usually people say it in a much more mean or aggressive way. Ignorant, stupid American, something like this. And so I thought I'd review some, or react to some, react, whatever, right-wing type of material. So I can show people that I think in my reaction to left-leaning videos, I was pretty at critical reaction in terms of like looking at things logically and not just going, no, this is right because it's Republican point of view, or this is wrong because it's against. I don't like that. I'm not about it. I think I'm fairly centrist, but I don't know. To left-leaning people, I probably look like some crazy anarchist. Maybe to right-leaning people, I look like a hippie. So anyway, let's check this out. Enough intro, sorry.
Today, my review of Squid Game, which is the biggest show on Netflix and maybe in Netflix history. We'll get to all of the details in just one moment. First, this video is sponsored by Helix Sleep.
Okay.
With some sort of mom. It's basically a guy who is living in poverty. He is divorced. The basic premise of Squid Game is essentially Hunger Games crossed with Parasite. That's the elevator pitch. It's basically a guy who is living in poverty. He is divorced. He has a bad relationship with his ex-wife. He's kind of a derelict. He's a gambler. And he's fallen into tremendous amounts of debt with a gang, with some sort of mob. And he eventually is approached by a man in a subway station who decides to play a game with him. And the stakes of the game are that if he loses, then the man gets to slap him in the face really, really hard. And if he wins, then the guy gives him money. So this goes on for a few rounds, keeps losing and losing and losing. Finally, he wins some money. And the guy hands him a card and says, if you want to play more games like this, then let me know. He, of course, decides that he's going to call the number. He ends up being kidnapped, sort of, and taken to a place where they play these children's games. And there are going to be 6 rounds of the children's games. And if you make it through all 6 rounds, then you win this massive pot of money. What they don't tell you is that if you lose the games, then you die. So the very first episode, you have them play red light, green light, and everybody who moves during the red light phase of the game is immediately shot by snipers to death. You can kind of see.
Just want to say, side note, they never mention. I don't believe they ever mention in the movie that like it was unfair to say to the people that died because they didn't know, they didn't get the chance to, like, they weren't going into it knowing that. So I know so that once they took a vote, they got to say, oh, this is wrong or whatever at a certain point, but the people who were dead, they didn't. Anyway, apart from the review, so it's back
see this coming, frankly. Like, if you knew anything about the show, or
no one cares about that, so I'm sorry.
Or if you had any idea of where this was going, this was not a giant surprise. The first episode is not particularly gory, but it is kind of disturbing in that everybody is being killed off. But, very much like Battle Royale, the Japanese precursor to Hunger Games or Hunger Games itself.
There's so much great stuff from Japan that people don't know is copied from Japan.
As the show goes on, the games become more and more scary. You have a couple of other characters who are introduced. You have a young woman who's escaped from North Korea, who's essentially attempting to win the money so that she can give the money to a trafficker to get her mom out of North Korea, and also so that she can afford to buy a house with her younger brother. You have a mob member who is attempting to pay off his bad old debts. A crazy woman whose backstory you don't actually really get. You have a friend of the main character who made something of himself and now has mysteriously ended up in this game. And the reason is because he attempted embezzlement and he used money he didn't own in order to try and buy futures, and the futures went south, and so he ends up buying millions and millions of won. And there's this old man who's tagging along because he has brain cancer and he figures I may as well win some money for my family before I die. And they go through various permutations. Meanwhile, there's sort of a side story where a cop infiltrates and he's trying to figure out who's at the head of this organization that's attempting to create these games and torture these people. And it's kind of an interesting setup. In one episode, the people are actually allowed to be let go. Because the rules of the game are, once you sign up, you have to play. If you don't play, you get shot. But if a majority of the players at any given time decide that they no longer want to play the game, then the entire game is disbanded, and the money that was collected for the game is distributed to the families of the people who died. So, in an early episode, that's one of the things that happens. Everybody sort of goes back to their regular life. And then, of course, they end up coming back to the game because they have no options in the outside world. And this
Wait a minute. I just forgot something.
The game is disbanded, and the money that was collected for the game is distributed to the families of the people who died. So, the entire game is disbanded, and the time decide that they no longer want to play the game, then the entire game is disbanded, and the money that was collected for the game is distributed to the families of the people who died.
Okay.
So, in an early episode, that's one of the things that happens. Everybody sort of goes back to their regular life, and then, of course, they end up coming back to the game because they have no options in the outside world. And this really brings us to the central sort of parasite aspect of Squid Game. It is a dystopian thriller, and so the politics are very communistic in nature. The politics for this very large budget show, which is being shown on Netflix, which is
I think it has some sort of socialism or communism type of. You know what? I wouldn't even say that. I would say it just is a critique on it. Not even a critique. I'd say it's just showing how bad it can be when a system is dominated by just a very small amount of large players, either a monopoly or something similar to a monopoly, and or there's just a ton of people with very little resources to get them to a better life, like at least a middle class sort of income. And that's kind of where both Korea and America are like heading, and that's where a lot of the world is, where it's just like, you know, this small amount of ultra rich people and then mostly ultra poor people. You know, in most of the world, the middle class is shrinking. So, in my opinion, that's more of a, it's not necessarily saying that communism or socialism is the way. It's just saying that like whatever's is causing people to be in such poverty, so many people, such a large percentage of the population is something that should be accounted for and taken and fixed. But I don't think it's necessarily saying communism or socialism. But in my opinion, it's the biggest thing is like wealth that is handed down to another generation. Because I think if someone works, starts from very poor or nothing or maybe a little something or whatever, and works their way up to get a lot of things, money, that's fine. I think once you give that you work for then to your child or to someone else who didn't really earn anything, you know, and they can just live off of that and live off of interest from whatever that they get from the bank, the money just sitting in the bank, or you know, some passive investments. They're not really contributing anything, so it's just taking, and they can just take their whole life, and they can take as much as they want. And I think that's where the problem is. So I think there's a lot of ways to potentially deal with that. One thing I would say is like really strong sort of inheritance taxes, but there's a lot of issues with that, and I could talk about that in another video. Anyway, enough, I'll listen more.
Is a high market cap tech company are extraordinarily far to the left. The basic idea is that capitalism provides so little opportunity that you would rather play a game where you might get shot just to make money than attempt to live out your life in the regular world.
Again, I would disagree with his assessment. I think, you know, Ben Shapiro is really aggressive in his defense of capitalism, and so he's, you know, always on edge, and he sees this as a strong attack against capitalism. I see it a different way. I see it just pointing out an issue, you know, that occurs. And this is only 4 minutes in, but I'll just say that one thing that Ben Shapiro and this is maybe the biggest thing that I see ultra smart people not really take into account, is that their reality and how they see the world, how they experience things, how they calculate things, and use their logic to get through life is so much different than most people that to them it seems like they're just being like intentionally stupid or intentionally lazy or whatever. You know, I could think of so many issues that could cause someone an intense amount of difficulty, so much more than what Ben Shapiro would have to, you know, if they, let's say they wanted to take a similar path to him and try to, like, you know, start his own sort of network YouTube thing and make money this way. You know, most people would have a difficult time kind of just figuring out how to, you know, get a balanced budget and get a loan to build a studio or whatever. All these things, like, it seems very simple to someone intelligent, like very intelligent or intelligent. But most people are not very intelligent. A lot of people are not even intelligent. That's just, and I don't. It's a sad reality, but that's how it is. And so, like, people who are not intelligent, they're eventually, you know, their money is going to always be taken and taken away. They're not going to have more and more built up in a system where there isn't something to prevent the passing down of money amongst people with good genes who have accumulated money and then pass it to their child, who likely also has you know, some degree of intelligence, or I don't even want to say intelligence, but sometimes intelligent or a lot of drive or whatever it is that causes someone to gather a lot of money. Often those genes are passed on to the next generation. Not always, but often. So it's just, and then, you know, usually the genes that keep someone poor are passed down to other generations. So it's just, you just keep going in more of a loss and loss, and then these people go in more of a gain and gain. Anyway.
And you see some of the other characters who are in the regular world, right? So the main character, who again is sort of a derelict and a gambler, his mom is trying to live a normal life, but she's got diabetes and she doesn't have enough money to pay for her surgical care.
So here's where I want to. Any international people who are not American, and America gets so much flack for the healthcare system, and you criticize America and say, oh, it's the only country without universal healthcare, and like, oh, it must be so great in all these other countries. I don't know exactly, and if anybody knows the Korean healthcare system very well, and maybe can prove that they know it somehow, I would be very interested to hear why this is the case. If this is just a tale for the movie, it's possible that it's just a made-up storyline where this wouldn't really happen. But even in America, old people have free healthcare, so this person would be taken care of in America, for sure. You know, as long as they weren't, like, some old people are like, you know, maybe they were insane and they don't even know how to get to the hospital or whatever. But you would be taken care of if you were old. I think it's over 65. You get your health care taken care of. If you have, you know, no money, or almost nothing. So this is, to me, not realistic for America, and it's very sad. And I think you know, no one talks about this, and they just think America's, oh, you're all on your own, which a lot of times it is, and I don't like that. But if it's so great in these other countries, why is this happening? I want to know. If somebody, and I hear this a lot. I know people from other countries where they have universal health care, and people, they just die because they can't. They're waiting for a surgery and there's too long of line. They don't have the money to pay for it. This is usually wouldn't happen in America. If you're ultra poor, you get your healthcare taken care of. If you're old, you get your healthcare taken care of.
In the regular world, and you see some of
in
the
America, and apparently, I know for a fact, some countries. it's not the case, even when they have universal healthcare.
Other characters who are in the regular world, right? So the main character, who again is sort of a derelict and a gambler, his mom is trying to live a normal life, but she's got diabetes and she doesn't have enough money to pay for her surgical care, so she might lose her feet, for example. You have the mother of the guy who is corrupt and embezzling, and she runs like a very small stand, but is obviously living in some form of poverty. You have the North Korean escapee who is basically almost homeless.
Didn't seem like poverty.
And who is forced to steal money. And there's a scene where the North Korean escapee is asked by another character, you escaped from North Korea, was it worth it? And the answer seems to be not really, which is kind of a strange take because North Korea is a giant...
It's too bad. I don't think Ben Shapiro knows much about like North Korean immigrants, escapees, leaving North Korea and going to South Korea. I don't know that much either, but I've listened to a decent amount of them, and there's a lot of issues that play into this, but going from a society that's just so vastly different to one in South Korea, where it is a sort of a society that's difficult to can be difficult to rise up in economically, and is I don't know, in my opinion, dominated by certain oligarch sort of figures. But to just focus on the individual, it can be overwhelming, and so of course on paper it's better in South Korea, but there's a lot of other factors that play into someone's life, and there are different classes of North Koreans. I don't know if they get into this in terms of how much money they have. And I've heard some Koreans that live like an okay life. Most are not, but some are. So I don't know if they go into that in the movie. I just saw a few, or in the show, I just saw a few episodes. But if you kind of are just living like this very basic life where, I don't even know exactly how the average Korean gets food or money. You know, maybe you just have like a small farm or something. But you're like, I don't even know. I don't even know. It's hard to say. But if you're kind of barely scraping by, barely getting food, and then you come to South Korea and there's like a million things that you have to do, and you're just kind of barely getting by, you can understand where it could be difficult. Also, you're without your family, you're without like everything you're accustomed to. There's a lot of difficulty in especially if you're not an ultra intelligent person, or just whatever your personality is not that great for a capitalistic system. So this video, it just surprises me a little. No one's perfect, and Ben Shapiro, he does get a lot of money from defending capitalism, because that's what his base wants, and I do think he may, if you brought these issues up with him, he may kind of change his tune or kind of take these things into account. It is a little surprising that he seems to not take these into account at all, but yeah, I mean, he's trying to make a living too, so not saying that it's right to not think more critically, but there's like I said, his base likes it, and I don't know if it's him just kind of talking to the base, or if it's him just unintentionally not thinking critically enough, or both. But yeah.
Giant gulag. It's a giant prison camp. So no matter what you think of South Korea, it is not comparable in any way, shape, or form to the lifestyle in North Korea, where people are, on average, several inches shorter than people in South Korea because of malnutrition. Also,
I'd say that's mostly true. You know, the average South Korean is in a better place fiscally than the average North Korean. But in terms of like mental health or joy, I don't know. I've heard that it can be quite bad in South Korea. I'm guessing it is better in South Korea, but it might not be this giant difference.
If you make a show criticizing the regime in South Korea, it goes viral and ends up on Netflix. If you create a show criticizing the regime in North Korea, they strap you to the front of an anti-aircraft gun and then open fire. So that seems to be a slight difference. But the basic idea here is the same as the basic idea in Parasite, which is that if you are poor in South Korea, there is no way up the ladder because capitalism is evil.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think it's a big jump. I guess I'll keep repeating this because he kind of keeps saying the same thing, but.
And there are a bunch of kind of notes that are put into the show that underscore this very silly theme. One of those notes is that when you get to the ending episodes and you find out who are the VIPs who bet on who is going to win and who's going to lose the game, they're all American. Like, they're all these big American fat cats, so it's really the evil Americans, their capitalist excesses, these decadent Americans who are behind this whole thing. There's not a good American in the entire show. They're just a bunch of Americans who are wearing these glittery masks, a la Hunger Games, and this is supposed to characterize the idea that really South Korean economics is run at the behest of these evil white corporate paymasters. The biggest spoiler of...
I don't know if he's right in that interpretation. I don't know if he's wrong. But you know, one of the guys he will go on to say is Korean also, and you know, there's plenty of wealthy Korean people. Yeah, I guess it is a little weird that they make it kind of they put such a focus on white Americans, but I don't know.
Of course, that the person who's heading up the Squid Game is the old man, right? So the old man is playing, and it turns out that he's playing out of fun. He's not actually playing because he is worried about dying. He does have brain cancer, that part's true, but he's the head of a major corporation. He's a very wealthy industrialist, and his entire shtick is that all of this is justified. Squid Game is justified because it is, in fact, more fair than the actual capitalist economy that is in place in South Korea. Okay, this is a very silly view of capitalism. Capitalism...
I'll agree with that. That's, I mean, I don't think it's really fair to kill, like, 400 people for one person to get a bunch of money. I don't know.
Is literally predicated on the notion that you do not get something unless you give something to somebody else. As Hayek was fond of suggesting, the basic premise of capitalism is that you are forced to do something you wouldn't have normally done for somebody else because you need something from them. Trade ennobles. Trade is good. But for people who don't understand capitalism and come from sort of a Marxist-leaning bent, capitalism is a zero-sum game. Somebody wins and somebody loses. Somebody wins the big pot of cash and somebody dies. Of course, the metaphor inside the Squid Game is supposed to be that if...
I do think you made a good point there, and that capitalism is not a zero-sum game. You know, if somebody has this product and somebody has this product, they could trade, but, you know, they'll use money to buy each other's products, and they can, you know, have a better life because maybe there's a couple people here, there's 5, 10 people here, they all trade their products to get more products that they wouldn't have otherwise. So so you know, they all come out with more than they had previously. That's, you know, very simplified, but yeah. I would say that even though to add an asterisks, whatever, little dot thing to that, asterisks or asterisks. Okay, to that, it can be very difficult if, again, like a very small amount of corporations or one corporation or what there's a, if a industry is dominated by, you know, one company, if you know, you want to get into mining and most of the, let's say, copper mines are owned by one giant company. It's going to be pretty hard to get into that industry, unless you find another mine or are able to buy one off of them or something. It's in certain parts of the, if you want to start a clothing store, you're going to have a lot of competition. It's going to be very difficult. You're going to have, you have to find a way. You have to be either way better than the competition, or find an area doesn't have much competition, and so it's just not so easy as saying it's a zero-sum game, because it's incredibly difficult, and you could spend a ton of money and not get anything back. It's in that sense, it's also not a game. It's not something where you can kind of keep failing and then continuing. If you keep borrowing money, eventually you're not going to get more loans to borrow money. You're going to have to work at if you don't have any education or special skills, you work at like a minimum job to pay off all these debts or something, or you go into bankruptcy, then you have to wait for a long time to get loans again. It's just not something I would say it's I wouldn't say it's a zero-sum game. I also wouldn't say, oh, it's not a zero-sum game, therefore just go out and work hard or whatever. It's not at all near that easy for most people.
If only the population seized the means of production through majority votes, then all of this would end and we would usher in a new and better world, right? All it takes is a majority vote to stop this terrible system where some people are being murdered for the benefit of other people. Okay, but that assumes that economics is a zero-sum game, right? Which it is not. It assumes that capitalism is a zero-sum game, which it is not. We'll get to more on this in just 1 second. First, I need my Helix Sleep mattress. I really, really do. Helix Sleep has a quiz. It takes just 2 minutes to complete. It matches my wife and I got an all-in-one. Helix is awesome. You don't need to take my word. I GQ and wired movement in sleep quality. So, that'll give you the best. If you don't love it, you can send it back. Orders and 2 free pillows. The sort of capitalist critique rings pretty hollow and doesn't have a lot of support other than sort of the polemical notion that anybody who's involved in the capitalist system is somehow corrupt and evil. You literally see no business people other than people who are exploitative or embezzling. Okay, I didn't like Parasite for this very reason, because it seemed like sort of a brainless critique of capitalism. My critique of Parasite is that the poor people in Parasite are supposed to be sympathetic, but they literally do nothing right, and the rich people in Parasite are supposed to be bad, and therefore worthy of punishment, and they literally don't do anything that is immoral in the course of the movie, like, at all. And yet, you're just supposed to assume that the rich people are bad and the poor people are somehow good. The same thing sort of holds true in this show. In this show,
I don't think that's true. I would disagree with that completely. I don't think there was any sort of inferences to saying that the rich people were bad. I think it was just people came in and they were, they lied their way in and they caused a bunch of things, and people won't ruin it, but I think it was just a story. I don't think it was saying these are bad or good. I didn't get that at all. That's that message.
All of the poor people are perceived as sort of innately more noble than the people who are rich, even though the reality is that the poor people in the show, aside from the North Korean refugee, like the main character is a derelict gambler. He's a bad guy, okay, and he's gradually ennobled by his participation in the game is sort of the idea, but all of the characters who are seen to participate in the capitalist system are, of course, very, very bad. And so that's the political take on the show, and it seems like that is the message that is now being exported by the South Korean film industry. As far as the actual show itself, like whether it's entertaining or not, yeah, I mean, it's entertaining. It's definitely very watchable. It gets extremely gory. There's a very bizarre side plot about selling of bodily organs that gets really graphic and kind of gross. I will say I thought the twists were predictable. Maybe that's because I've watched too many movies, and maybe it's because...
Maybe that's a commentary on Chinese doing organ harvesting on Uyghurs or prisoners. Look it up.
I've written stuff myself, but it's pretty obvious from the beginning that whoever is going to be leading up the Squid Game has to be an integral character, otherwise it has no meaning when you reveal who's leading up the Squid Game. So that means that it can't be any of the young people who get killed. The only person it could be, theoretically, is the old man, really. So I kind of called that one maybe 3 episodes in advance. And also, the other big mystery of the show is that you have a cop who's trying to search for his brother, who's supposedly been taken into the system, and it turns out that he is a part of the system. That, again, was not super unpredictable. But overall, if you had to rate Squid Game in terms of watchability and sort of addictiveness, pretty good show. I would give it maybe a 7 out of 10. In terms of politics, I give it like a 1 out of 10, because, again, the politics of it are so baseline Hollywood silly. They really make no level of actual
I don't think this was made in Hollywood.
sense. Presume they're setting up for a second season of Squid Game as well, because the season ends on a cliffhanger with the main character basically deciding that he is going to go take down the Squid Game as opposed to leaving the country and heading off to America. So I'm sure that will be the second season. He will probably have to infiltrate, or he will have to figure out some way to enter into the system itself, which, I'll start to watch it, for sure. But is it worthy of the sort of high praise that it's been receiving in some quarters? Probably not. Is it watchable? For sure.
Okay.
The good. Compelling, well-acted, well-produced, interesting. It's a beautiful-looking show. The sets that they built for the various games are really intricate. They look really good. They're sort of oddly creepy, because the sets that they built for the children's games, it's supposed to be almost as though they're in this kind of giant dollhouse. The feel of the show is really good. It's well filmed. It's well directed. The most compelling episode is episode 6, because it really forces the characters to take stock of the fact that they essentially have to kill other people in order to get ahead. But again, as a metaphor for capitalism, it's very silly, but it's very emotionally affecting, and it does put the characters in a really difficult emotional bind. So it's well written and it's well acted. That is probably the best episode of the show. The bad, politically asinine. Politically, it makes no sense at all. Somewhat predictable in terms of the twists and turns. Very, very bloody. Like, super bloody. So that first episode is not an indicator of what the bloodiness level will be in future episodes. That first episode just has people getting shot, like in the head, and it's fairly graphic. That is not even close to how graphic the show ends up getting. They use some old film and TV tropes. So bad guys listen to classical music. This is just a reality of the world, as we all know, is that all bad people listen to classical music. So that means that they're woken up to the Blue Danube Waltz by Strauss. And it means that the bad guys...
Ben Shapiro is mad because he listens to classical music. No, I don't know. It seems like he does now.
Are listening to, classic old jazz.
You like jazz?
So those are the good and the bad. Alrighty, that is my review.
Okay.
Of Squid Game. If there are other shows that you'd like me to review.
Okay. So, yeah, I think I pretty much responded to what he said. Again, I'll just repeat my biggest point is, to me, I'll say probably the biggest thing that intelligent people, or maybe even unintelligent people, just people who are have kind of have gotten capitalism to work for them, whatever way it is, or they've been handed something through capitalism. The biggest thing I'd say people kind of overlook is how difficult it can be for, if you don't have all the right things. You have to have a certain attitude, you have to have a certain mental state, you have to have a certain amount of drive, and I'd say that is the biggest thing that is not taken into account, is maybe I'm speaking because I know myself so much. I just naturally have always had really low energy levels. So I've always felt oh, why am I so lazy? Why am I so lazy? But I started to kind of try to do everything I can, and I've gotten a little bit better in terms of my energy levels. I've done some kind of drastic diet changes, and that's helped. Thank God. But for most of my life, I just felt real bad and lazy, and it's sometimes it's not someone's fault if they're genetic. That's genetically how they are. If you look at somebody like a Ben Shapiro or a Will Smith who has tons of energy, this is much more conducive for capitalism, because this is like, that's what you need. You need to keep going. And some people don't have that. It's very difficult, and for whatever reason, it could be depression, it could be, hormones, it could be just genetics, it could be a million different things. So that's that. Even take that, put that aside. Some people don't even have the intelligence, even if they have the energy or whatever, and they're just not as blessed and whatever. It could be more things that I do, maybe a lot more things that I don't mention. So yeah, I'd say this is hugely overlooked by Republicans, and I think if you would stop and talk with them about these, usually people are kind of see where you're coming from, and sometimes people get aggressive and they're like, "Whoa, you're trying to make like everything perfect. You can't make everything equal and perfect, but you can try. You can try to have as much." And often I hear Republicans say like, "Oh, I want to have equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome." But if you have true equality of opportunity, usually there's a much higher chance of equality of outcome. So if you have, if you're able to, let's say hypothetically in a perfect world, measure how someone's naturally, some people just like working. They get a joy from it. They really enjoy it. It's not that many people, but some people do. And some people hate it. They really feel bad when they're working to whatever capacity. And, for them, every day is terrible going to work. So it's just not fair because that's not something someone chose. So if you were able to take into account all these things and then, give the people who have a harder time more, I don't know capital to make up for that, I'd say that would be a true equality of opportunity. But I think there's actually realistic ways to deal with it. But I can again talk in another video about that some other time. So I don't know. Hopefully, someone found this interesting. Or again, yeah. Hopefully, it shows that I'm trying to think of the best for everyone, not just I'm super right wing or left wing. I think I talked about it in the intro enough. So hopefully you guys like this. Thanks for watching. Love you. God bless. Like, comment, subscribe if you want to, and you can